monthly newsletter with information. Monthly newsletter with information, sometimes coupons and specials for discounts and whatnot, and news from Terragen and the community. So, but it's optional to sign up to that. You can just download, install, and run it, and forget about anything else if you'd like. All right, so I'm going to get started here. I've got Terragen 3 up. This is what it looks like when you load Terragen 3 for the first time. This is our default scene here. A complete overview of the UI here. So I'm running the Windows version. It's a standard Windows user interface. You've got your file menu along the top. We might get to some of those options later. But the main user interface is centered around these buttons up here that switch between what we call layouts. So you've got basic file management buttons over here on the left, new, open, save, etc. This accesses the render view. This accesses the 3D preview. The library I'll show you more of later, but this is our content library that's new as of Terragen 3. And then over here, starting with objects, these are what we call layouts. So a layout is when you click on one of these buttons, it's changing the content here on the left and the settings as well in the 3D preview here on the right. So the objects layout shows you only the object node types that are in the scene. And when you switch to a different layout, it's going to switch the node types that you're seeing. It's going to switch the group that's being displayed in the node list here on your left. So each one of these is a different layout. Now you'll notice as I switch between these that the 3D preview is also changing what it's showing you. And the reason for that is that we have buttons to adjust what you're actually seeing, whether there's true lighting or not in the preview, whether the atmosphere is enabled or disabled, and whether the shaders are shown. And we preset certain layouts to have certain 3D preview settings because, for example, if you're in the terrain layout, most likely you don't need to see the clouds, you don't need to see the lighting. You can always turn them on if you want to, so that you can get a more full view of the scene, but it's faster to update and more directly focused on what you're wanting to see in a particular layout to have it set by default that way. So those are the layout buttons. They switch between sort of areas that are focused on these particular aspects of your scene. So objects is pretty clear. In Terragen, you're based around a planet. So this is the base planet, and everything connects, well, most everything connects to that. Anything that's shading the planet, anything that's contributing to the look of the planet itself, connects to the planet. So that includes all of your terrain shaders as well as your atmosphere shaders. Lighting is separate, and cameras and renderers are also separate. So they do not connect to the planet. But other objects will show up in here. If you add, we've got some built-in objects, and then you can load objects as well from an OBJ or a TGO or an LWO. So all of your objects will show up in here. We switch to terrain. You're going to see terrain shaders. Now, I'll just show you this briefly. I'm going to get to the node network in a little bit, but you'll see here along the left are these little buttons. These link to default groups in the node network. And these are the groups here, these big colored boxes. And the reason I'm bringing it up right now is this node list here shows you the nodes that are in the terrain group here. We're in the terrain layout, so this shows you the nodes that are in the terrain group. If I switch to shaders, you'll notice that the nodes look similar here. Base colors, it's this red circle. It looks like a similar possible shader type, and in fact it is. You can use similar shaders in both terrain and in shaders, but the difference is these are in the shaders group, and I'll explain some of the difference and why they're separated out into that group. But the point is that this node list here on the left is showing you nodes from the shaders group rather than the terrain group. So the same is true of all of these. Atmosphere is going to show you your atmosphere nodes, and lighting, camera, renderers are the other groups. So those are just the groups in the default scene. You can define your own groups as well. Again, I'll get to that in a little bit. So, oops, sorry about that. Going back to the node list over here. So this is a list of nodes that are correspond with the layout that you're in and any nodes that are connected to them and depend on them. So in the case of the planet, as I mentioned, pretty much all of your planet shading nodes are attached to that. They're children of it, essentially. There's also this background node. The background node is essentially a large sphere that surrounds the entire scene, and it's a convention for rendering. Essentially, it allows the renderer to have something, a background to render against. It's not really something you need to worry about or ever really edit, although you can actually texture it and add imagery and stuff like that to do like a celestial background, like a nebula or something. You'll sometimes add things into the background shader to do that, but it's a little bit more of an advanced technique, so I'll leave that there. Now you'll notice when I'm clicking on these nodes, down below here in the parameter view, it's switching which node parameter it's looking the parameter set it's looking at. So if I click on the planet, I get the settings for the planet down here. So you'll see parameter views come up here when you're using the node list. Any node you click on is going to give you the parameters for that node down here. You'll also be able to open up floating parameter windows for a node if you're using the node network over here on the right. And if you double click a node, it opens a floating window. One thing to be aware of is if you already have a given node open here, then clicking on it here is not going to open a floating window. Or excuse me, it's going to take the floating window take the window out of here and open it in a floating window, just as I did just then. So I have the fractal warp shader selected here, but since I clicked in the node network, it opened a floating parameter window instead. I'm getting somebody repeatedly attempting to join here. Let me check the chat. Okay, yeah. All right, moving on here. The 3D preview here, and actually I should mention the shader preview before I move on too far. There's a small shader preview here, and we can make it a little bigger by dragging this over. It's pretty basic at the moment. We're working on some improvements to it, but essentially it gives you a small preview of the terrain or whatever shader you're looking at from a top-down view. It shows the camera. You can zoom in and out with these buttons here, and it's just a small shaded, preview view of the shader that you're currently looking at. So if I look at base colors as another example, you can see that it's kind of giving you a quick view of what that shader looks like. As I said, we're working on some improvements to this, make it a little more easy to use, a little more useful, but it is there for the for functionality at the moment, and it can be handy. Let me see if I can load up another object here. So just to show you also, the 3D preview does have a mode now in Terragen 3 that shows you objects, and so when you're clicking on an object that it can display in the 3D preview, it will show it there, and you can kind of rotate it around and whatnot. I'll get to navigation controls in just a moment. Okay, so moving over here, on the right is the 3D preview, and this is really how you see what's going on with your scene, how you interact directly with your scene in many ways. It's a very important tool. Controls along the top, you've got pause, reset. These are the controls for which shader, which components of the 3D preview are enabled. So you've got shaders, atmosphere, and true lighting. When all those are disabled, you have a very basic, simplistic, and quick to render view of the scene. The 3D preview updates progressively, or rather it updates in stages, so you'll see it refine here. Detail 40, it's going to go to detail 80. 80 is the last detail level at present, and we're working on some improvements to the 3D preview to speed that up quite a bit as well, make it render more progressively. We did add multi-threading in Terragen 3, so we've got some basic multi-threading in there. Certain aspects of the 3D preview are more well-threaded than others, so depending on what you're doing, the 3D preview will be a good deal faster in Terragen 3 versus 2, but there's still some room for optimization there, so it'll only get better from here. For navigation, our standard navigation is you would hold down the Alt button, and then the left mouse button rotates you around the scene. The right mouse button pans you around the scene. So I'm panning left, panning right, and then also up and down. And then the middle mouse button, if you have one, is a zoom. So you can navigate around the scene extremely quickly this way, which is cool. It scales with the distance from the terrain. So the closer you are to the terrain, the finer your movement is going to become. And in fact, if you get really far away, it gets really fast. You can zoom all the way out to see the planet if you like. And I'll get back to showing you a little bit more about the planet in a bit. On the right here, you're going to see the navigation controls. And this is just a panel that gives you direct access and potentially more fine-grained access to navigating. You can still use the mouse-based controls, again holding Alt, and the mouse buttons. Left mouse button is to look around the scene, right mouse button is to pan. But this gives you more specific fine-grained control, this control panel here. You just click the little navigation button here to pop it out. It's got a little X to close it and pop it out. So you can pan left, right, up, down here. You can also tilt the camera up and down, move your camera in altitude up and down, zoom in and out, and rotate. And also, this is where you can do rolling, which is not so easy to do with the Alt mouse button navigation functionality. Down at the bottom is a setting for how fast the movement is. So on the left is slower, on the right is faster, and this only affects the navigation panel here. So as I'm panning here, it's going very quickly. Go down to minimum speed, and it's moving extremely slowly. It starts out in the middle. I'll close that. On the left is a compass. This helps in navigation. You'll notice as I'm turning the camera that the compass changes. You'll also see a little yellow dot on there. That's your sunlight. If you add another light source, it should show up. Excuse me, add another sunlight source, it should show up. Where is that guy? There he is. Anyway, there it is. You'll see the other sunlight source show up. Come back to here. And there's another mode for the compass as well. There's a 3D mode for it that I'm not using at the moment, but that's, I believe, in the options. You can turn that on. Let's go over the rest of the toolbar up here. In Terragen 3, there's some new options for viewing objects in the 3D preview. You'll notice this little box here. That is actually the bounding box for the object that I brought in earlier to demo the preview over the shader preview over here. But it's just a box right now. So let's use this button. We can show bounding, which is what we've got now. We can hide objects. We can also show wireframes and smooth shaded, and then we've got textured. So those options are new as of Terragen 3. It looks like this object actually doesn't have any leaves on it. Let's see if I've got a better object here. Load in a generic tree. There we go. That's better. So you can see the textured view working beautifully here. The smooth shaded and textured views are new as of Terragen 3. Previously, you had wireframe and then bounding box. So these are much more useful for positioning objects in the scene. And they work with instancing and populations and all that stuff. So very handy to have that. Next to the 3D preview modes is a button for the painted shader. I'm not sure we'll have time to get to the painted shader. I'm doing a separate tutorial video for that I'll be releasing soon. We'll be releasing through PlanetSide. You'll see it on social media and in the newsletter and stuff like that. So that'll cover some cool uses of the painted shader. But basically, you use this button to start and stop the painting mode for a given shader. You can also create a new shader here, a new painted shader, excuse me. Next to that is a button for population instance editing, which is another new Terragen 3 feature, and I'll show that in the second session that we'll be getting to starting around 1 o'clock today, I believe. And that's just the button to start the editing of population instances. Next to that is a measuring tool. So you've got just kind of a very simple but useful tool to measure distances. We work in real scales in Terragen, so everything is measured in meters or fractions of a meter. So here you've got millimeters. And so real-world scale is very important. The kind of fundamental philosophy of Terragen from the beginning all the way back to Terragen Classic, Terragen 0.9, has been realism and trying to emulate real world phenomenon and scales as best as possible. So for Terragen 3, Terragen 2 and also Terragen 3, we were able to base everything around meters pretty much. So wherever you're seeing numbers in measurements in the user interface, you're looking at meters in most cases. So this measurement tool allows you to just get an idea of the distance between something. It's useful for setting scales, useful for positioning objects and whatnot. And finally, next to that is the depth of field preview. So new as of Terragen 3 is depth of field. You can render depth of field. For those not familiar, depth of field is, let's say you have a photograph with the background out of focus. You've got a portrait of somebody, and the person in the foreground is in focus and sharp. The background is out of focus. So that background is out of the depth of field of the camera. The person in the foreground that's in focus is in the depth of field of the camera. So it's just the focus distance essentially, and it allows you to create nice blurred backgrounds and stuff like that. And maybe we'll get to depth of field a little bit more later. But anyway, we've got this preview. What that does is it shows you the edge of the focus distance there. And if I adjust the focus distance, you'll see that guy move. You should see that guy move. Why is he not moving? Demo fail. I'm not sure why this isn't working. I must have messed something up. In any case, the depth of field preview is intended to show you the depth of field focus distance, and perhaps we'll get to show you a little more of that later. All right, back to here. Along the bottom of the 3D preview are the camera controls. Now, you may have noticed me coming back to this button here and clicking current render camera. So in Terragen, when you move the camera, it does not automatically change the position of the camera object itself, the actual camera node. You go into a free look perspective mode. So for those of you familiar with View, they just announced a new version that actually has a similar feature to this, which is interesting. But this is the way Terragen has fundamentally worked. Terragen 2 and 3 have worked this way the whole time. And basically, you'll start out, you've got your current render camera view here, and this button switches between a number of different camera views. As soon as I start to move, you'll notice, watch this button here, it's going to change to P, and that means perspective. So as soon as I started to move, it changed to a default perspective that's used just to freely roam about the scene. And it hasn't changed my actual camera position yet. I can go back to current render camera, and it's back to where it was. But if I want to change it, then I just hit this button here, and just copy this view to the current render camera. So I just press that button. Now, if I start to move the camera and go back, it's going to go back to that position that I just set it at. So it allows you to explore the scene easily without changing your camera position, and then quickly set your camera position. You'll notice also there's a bunch of other camera views on here. None of these are all default camera views. They don't correspond to a specific camera node in the scene. So the perspective view is going to just be the regular view that you're in, but it doesn't affect the camera node. Top view is just again, it's like what it sounds like. It's top view. Zoom in, you can see where we are with the tree and everything. And bottom, front, back, left, and right view. So you've got some view options there. You go back to the current render camera. You can reset the camera positions and various aspects of them. And the menu also allows you to center on objects or shaders, which is very handy to be able to do. So if I navigate away from this and want to be able to center on an object, I can center on my generic tree just by doing that. It's a very quick way to navigate around the scene, especially when you're working with objects and whatnot. So that's handy to have. We've got the camera's look at point here. So that's just the point that the camera is literally looking at. You can just click and look directly at something. Next to that is the, sorry, I just reset the 3D preview. You might have seen me jump up there. So now you'll see that the view is back to not being textured. Let me turn that back on. But Next to the lookout point is the orbit point. So right now I'm kind of orbiting around this tree. If I set an orbit point over here, then you'll notice suddenly it's orbiting around that much further distance point. So it allows you to easily set what you're rotating around, which can be handy for navigating in particular ways. And then there's also a free orbit mode, which if you're not familiar with it, I wouldn't really worry about it, but it's a common convention in 3D applications, and it's a handy alternate navigation mode. All right, last thing on the 3D preview, we've got coordinates down at the bottom here. You'll notice they're not changing, but when I'm moving the mouse over the 3D preview, they do update in real time. So slope is one that's particularly useful. It's over on the far right there. You'll notice that this whole flat area, there's just no slope, but as soon as I get up to this mountainous area, the slope aspect changes quite a bit. So this is a good time to talk about coordinates in Terragen. You'll notice as I'm moving around the 3D preview, this is into the scene, right? So Y is vertical in Terragen is the most important thing to be aware of at this point, and that's somewhat different than it's similar to certain other applications and different than others. So there's no universal up vector in 3D software apparently. So we use Y for up. It's just something to be aware of, and it's a good foundational piece of information for Terragen. Just real quickly, there's also this exposure slider here on the left. I think most people are probably unaware of it. Not something you need to use that often, but it is kind of cool that it's there. Just a quick little thing. And so we've got these just panels that pop out and little useful tools and stuff like that around the 3D preview, which is good to know. Okay, I'm gonna move on. My demo's getting long. Sorry, the node network is the final window down here. And I've been talking about nodes the whole time. I probably should have introduced them. In Terragen, a node is just a building block of the scene. A node could be the camera or the renderer. The renderer is a node. There are lights here. The planet is a node, so that the actual foundation of the scene is a planet, and that's also a node. Pretty much everything is expressed as nodes in Terragen, and then nodes have settings, as I mentioned, the parameter views here. If you double click a node in the node network. So one thing I definitely want to talk about is that this method of working is not, familiar to everyone. Working in a node network structure, you've got nodes that connect to each other with these lines that represent data flow through the network, and you can see the data is flowing from this top node down through here and into the planet. It's not intuitive to everyone, and we recognize that, and that's exactly what the node lists are for. The node network view here is very powerful, and if you're comfortable with it, you can do a lot of really cool, powerful things with it. But we've also tried to make it as easy as possible to work in the node lists to do a majority of stuff. And this is something I want to mention in particular for those who are familiar with Terragen Classic. Terragen Classic had a pretty simple user interface, but one of the major things that people remember, here we are in Terragen Classic, is the surface map tree here. It was a very simple linear thing. Well, if you notice, it's very similar, in fact, to the node lists that we have in Terragen 3. And you can work in a very similar fashion. They are hierarchical in a similar way. There's child parenting and whatnot, which is again was all in Terragen Classic. It works very, very similarly. So that shaders view in Terragen Classic corresponds to the shaders group here. And while we're in the node network, now I'm going to go over what those kind of the flow of the data just real quickly and what those groups do. So the terrain group is intended for setting the foundational structure of your scene, the actual shape of the terrain in particular. So you've got your terrain shaders here, and then it ends with a compute terrain. And I'm mentioning this in particular because you'll notice that none of the other groups have that. The compute terrain is a very specific node that's used generally at the end of the terrain group. It can be used in other areas, and it basically just performs some calculations that allow you to more effectively texture the terrain after the compute terrain. So it's computing normals. It's you'll notice if you look in the settings here, there's some simple settings. You can smooth surface, gradient patch size. This is again measured in meters, and this just sets the it helps control the detail upon which certain down the chain shaders will work. I don't really have time to go into depth with all of this stuff. I notice my time is still running, but anyways, the point is that you want to do your major terrain changes here in the terrain group, and this corresponds to the terrain layout up here. So again, you don't have to work in the node network. You can work up here and do all of your terrain editing here. So I'm just going to quickly go over what's in the default scene to give you an idea of how things work. We've got a fractal terrain, which is one of the most basic terrain types in Terragen. Here, you'll notice this button at the top of the layout. In fact, I should have mentioned these before. So these buttons generally are for adding nodes to your scene, and there's similar buttons in most of the layouts where you can add, shaders here, you can add a water object here, etc. So the fractal terrain is the most basic, pretty much the most basic terrain shader in Terragen. There's a number of others available here. You can load height fields. So especially with Terragen Classic, lots of people would trade and load height fields. In Terragen 3, we have a new load DEM, so you can load digital elevation. If I have time to show that, I'll definitely jump over to that. And you can also load a similar height field generator to what was in Terragen Classic with some options for generating a new height field, but I'm not going to go with that. The node lists work, simply you can select a node and hit delete, the delete key, and get rid of it. So you've got your fractal terrain here, and then it's being masked by a simple shape shader to make this flat area in the foreground. So I'm going to turn off the simple shape shader just so you see what that does. Suddenly there's terrain everywhere. So we wanted the default scene to have this flat area close to the camera, just so you were able to kind of get a better view of what was going on in the scene and have a flat area to play with objects and stuff like that. And that simple shape shader is exactly what does that. So the simple shape shader, in this case, is masking out an area with fall off here that's creating a flat area around the camera. And then finally, we're adding some additional detail with this fractal warp shader here. So I don't have time to go into the details of what all these guys do, but I did want to show you the basic scene construction there and how that works. So basically, it starts with has a mask down here of the simple shape shader, which is creating that flat area, and then you're able to specify your mask here, and that's a simple shape shader. And then the fractal warp shader comes after that, operating on the terrain that was created by the fractal terrain, masked by the simple shape shader, and then you're adding the fractal warp. So I could add another terrain on top of that if I wanted to, for example, a power fractal, and you'll note that it was just added. Now, here's a good time to show you, this wasn't visible before, but if you look over here in the 3D preview, there's this little red icon that looks kind of like jagged mountains. That's letting you know that you're underneath the terrain. So sometimes you'll add a new shader with significant displacement. It'll put you under the terrain. So you just got to move your camera up. This particular shader has quite significant amplitude. So you'll see I was under the terrain by quite a bit. I'll get rid of that guy. It'll go back to the way it was. But in any case, the lower down the line shaders in the shader list here, the node list, and also in the node network, they just build on top of what you've already built, basically. So they're adding to it. And then the same thing is true once you get past the terrain group into the shaders group here. So in the default Terragen scene, you'll have this base colors node. This is intended just to provide basic color to the landscape. Otherwise, you're going to have a black landscape, as you can see here, which you don't want. You can change the colors in it. You can do whatever you want with this base colors node if you like, but it's there just to provide a basis for things, and generally there's no need to get rid of it. You can cover it over completely, whatever you want to do with it. Water is not enabled by default. You can add it. It's just a lake object at the moment, but you can add also a water shader and other ways. Atmosphere, you come in with a default atmosphere but no clouds. So one thing you'll also notice as I'm clicking around here is that the node network zooms to the group for the layout that I click on. So I'm in atmosphere or I'm in lighting. See how it's zooming the node network to the lighting area. So that's also a little handy feature. Anyway, in atmosphere, you can add cloud layers. We've got a couple of presets here, but the library is really where you're going to find a lot more of that kind of stuff. I need to get to demoing that real quick. All right, so let's get to the library. And I popped this up a couple times during the demo. Library is accessed through this main button right here. And this is a major new feature of Terragen 3. Vue users will be very familiar with something like this, but we've got our own version now, and it's got some, I think, some useful features in it. So one of the things you'll notice is you can sort by type here. These are categories for type, and then you've got an actual category section. The categories roughly correspond to the groups down here. So I think most of this is the preset content. Hopefully it is. So Terragen 3 has available a library of presets that we've put together, a lot of it drawn from some of our alpha testers and some of our higher end users, and we're continuing to build on that library. So future updates will come with more content, but it's everything from basic stuff like a fill light setup here to this multiple sun setup. It's only a few lighting setups, but there's a bunch of we've got cloud types. It comes with some, and also an object bundle here. So there's about 20 objects, most of which were donated by Silva 3D. So thanks to them, and they've got a bunch of great additional objects there. We're also working with Xfrog. We're going to be providing some free objects from Xfrog in addition to the ones that we've got on our free version download page. So it's a fair amount of content to work with to really get started quickly in your scene. Let's see, I'll just go over quickly some of the stuff in the library. So I've been clicking around to filter by different types and different categories and whatnot. Once you find something that you want to use, I'm going to go back to my current render perspective. You just double click on it and it'll add it to the scene. So there it is. Just move this guy out of the way. Brought in this tiny little tree here. But you can also add a population of things from here. So there's these buttons down in the lower right. The import object is the same as double clicking on it, but you can import population, and that will create a population which is our equivalent to the ecosystem, I believe, in Vue for those Vue users who are here. And a population has a whole bunch of population related settings, the number of instances, all that kind of stuff. And let's see, I've lost my, there he is. So I'll just populate and you'll see all the instances show up in the 3D preview here in a moment. There they are. All right. So, and that is, let's see here, almost 10,000 objects that were just added in the populator here. So I'm not in my, there we go. So let's see what else. The library. You can add keywords, or sorry, you can add tags and descriptions to your items in the library. Metadata tags are here, etc., and then you can search by tags later. We're working on a bunch of improvements to the library. You can add items by scanning and whatnot. I did a demo for the pre-release before Terragen 3 was released, just to kind of show this feature a bit, and so I went through some of those features a little more in that demo. So I'll leave the library there for now, and you can watch that video to get a little more idea of it. But we'll be working on some more videos to show some of these features more in depth, and I'll also be showing the library feature in the upcoming next session as well. So I'll have time to go over more of that for those of you who can stick around. Okay, that was most of what I wanted to show, and I'm definitely getting towards time for the Q&A. I did want to just point out a few other things in this intro. that I feel like are useful tools for people to kind of be aware of in working with Terragen. There's a lot of little user interface conventions that I think are not necessarily immediately obvious, but make things much easier to work with. In particular, when you're working with the node lists here, I want to show some of that. So I showed earlier masking this terrain is masked by a simple shape shader. Is there a question? Oh.
Yeah, just to let you know, Ocean, we've got 2 or 3 questions that people have put into the chat box, which I've stored up for you. But if you want to finish what you're doing, I think that would be okay.
Yeah, I'm close to be done.
We just relatively simple questions, so perhaps one of them could be covered in the next session anyway. So
okay,
go ahead.
Great.
Go ahead and finish.
All right. So mainly, what I wanted to show, as I said before, Terragen works in meters, so we've got all these values are measured in meters. Won't have time to go in depth into the what these settings do, but just to give you an overview of what a node parameter view looks like and kind of some of the standard options is what I wanted to do. So you've got this enable checkbox here that enables and disables a shader. You'll see 3D preview update here. I'm enabling and disabling that primary fractal terrain shader that's providing the basic terrain shape, that mountain in the background. Now that's an infinite procedural terrain. It's going around the entire planet. Most of the procedural shaders in Terragen do that by default. So we work on a planet scale. You can zoom out to see the planet at any time and explore in different areas. And that's another kind of foundational principle of Terragen. But things are arranged in tabs to kind of keep things from being too overwhelming and separate things out a bit. You'll notice on the left of a lot of settings, this is for Michelle and Dre, this is the animation button. So from any setting, virtually any setting, you can set an animation key. You can remove the key from that setting, and you can also show it in the animation panel here. I don't have any animation set up at the moment, but I'll try and show that maybe in the Q&A session or something like that. But that's where you start with a lot of animation, is this animation button here, and it's literally on almost every setting you can see. So you can animate almost anything in Terragen 3, which is pretty cool. To the right here is this general, well, here's the name of the node, so you can set the name. You can add whatever you want to that. It starts out just being named by the node type. And on the right here is a general options button. It allows you to edit an internal network or center on the node in the network. Again, if you're not really needing to work with the node network, then you don't really need to worry about that too much. You can also open a preview of this shader in a new window. So it's this preview here in this case, but opened in a new window that allows you to put it on a second monitor, change the size of it, etc. And this can be handy for, as you can see, there's a painted shader button here as well. So it's handy to paint in the top-down view, and you've got the measuring tool here as well as the navigation controls and some of the basic camera controls. So the previews in a separate window are handy. In fact, I should get to the menus real quickly. Anyways, so much stuff to cover. This is a help button. It takes you straight to our online help node reference. We're still working on filling out some of the node reference, but there's quite a lot of stuff there already. So help is immediately accessible from the interface. And then I just wanted to quickly show you 2 other buttons that are common in nodes. You've got this button on the right here, and that's a copy paste coordinate button. So it can be very handy for moving large sets of data and coordinates between nodes. So let's say I wanted to copy these 3 coordinates. I can just go copy, and then I can paste them into any other position parameter. So there we go. I've just pasted them into that position parameter. The other thing I wanted to show you is this button here, where you've got a green plus and a little arrow. This is a button to specify a shader. And what's cool about this is you'll see the currently specified shader here by name. And then you can go to the settings of that shader real quickly there. But you can also break the connection. You can assign a new shader, or you can create a new shader. And you can even insert a clip file, which I'll show you in the library demo in the next session. But anyway, this is a very important button if you're going to be working in the node list rather than in the node network over here, because in the node network, I can just click and drag to connect things around, right? If I want to mask this fractal warp shader, I can just drag the output of this shader into the input of this node, this mask shader, or sorry, the mask input here. But obviously you can't do that here. You can't click and drag, that from there to there. You can rearrange the shader's, position in the list, but you can't. You'll see that's what I was just doing. But you can't specify a shader input easily, but you can do it here in the settings. So that was kind of just an important thing I want to go over. Last but not least, there are some items up here in the menus that I want to show you real quickly. You can access a preview in a new window. There's a location window that has additional information. You'll see distance from cameras, particularly useful for depth of field stuff. The view camera location, the cursor location. So some of that stuff is at the bottom of the 3D preview, but it's a handy additional window. Again, you can open it and stick it on another monitor. You can open a node network in a new window. So generally you see the theme is you can open lots of things in new windows. And there's an errors and warnings panel, an undo history. So that's also a handy thing just to get an overview of the actions that you've taken and being able to undo to them by selecting them by name. And lots of other things that I could show you. The node palette is pretty cool and other things, but I'll have to skip that for today. In the project area, various utility functions, being able to populate all the populations in the scene, etc. And then there's some other mouse and key settings is a reference in the help menu, for example, that gives you all of the default specified settings. So, okay, I'm going to call it there. I have a lot more stuff that I want to show you, but we're running long. So let's get to the Q&A. And thanks for watching, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Ocean. That was fantastic to see that overview. There's a question from Alan Mordew, and he's asking if there's what's called an orthographic view available on a camera, which means like a top or side view. You can switch to. So is that available?
Yes. So orthographic camera, there's two answers to that question. There is an orthographic camera mode. So if you go to the render camera, I'm switching to the cameras layout here and then clicking on the render camera node, and you'll see there's an orthographic option here. There's also a spherical option, which is new for Terragen 3. There is an orthographic camera option, and that's for rendering. The views here, some of these views are also, I believe, technically orthographic views, and that just means that they don't have perspective. If you know what an orthographic camera is, then you know what I'm saying when I say that. But in any case, yes, these views, the top view, bottom view, etc., I believe are all orthographic and that they don't have perspective. And then for rendering purposes, there is an orthographic camera option here, and you can specify that by height or width here.
Okay,
right,
thank you.
Bob has a question. He wants you to show really quickly how an individual object in a population can be modified.
That will be shown in the next session. Yeah, definitely.
Michelle, if you want to unmic yourself, you can ask an audio question.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, as you were presenting, I managed to build a scene actually right away. It's quite intuitive. But I was wondering, when you started to talk about them, we have a drone, a GPS controlled drone, and we do scan in areas up to 40 by 40 kilometers. Now,
Wow,
usually
okay.
I take those into Global Mapper and split them up into multiple DEM files. So we end up with 16 or maybe 32 tiles. Is that something Terragen can handle?
Yes. Currently, you'd have to individually load the tiles, but with if they're georeferenced, then they would line up. We do have georeferencing in the DEM
Yeah,
loader.
they have that, and actually at 1 centimeter accuracy.
Wow, that's a really detailed DEM. Well, I'm curious if depending on what format it is, Terragen 3 might be able to load that DEM natively, just load it right away. And again, depending on the size of the data, you might be able to load the undivided, the unsplit file, which would, of course, just load all the data. If not, then you'd have to load each tile individually. We will be doing a automatic tile loading, so where it'll load all of the tiles that it can detect. So there's a Mars MOLA data loader that we have in Terragen 2 and 3, and that does that. It looks at all of the data that you might have and just positions it all correctly. So we'll be.
Can it also load in raw ASCII data, high data, XYZ?
I'm not positive on whether that format is supported. We're using
like grid points, 3D grid cloud.
Point clouds, no, but if it's a height field format, it's most likely that we'll be able to load it natively. We don't load point cloud formats at present.
Yeah, because I could still do that in global map and get it over. Because we got about 30 animations coming up, and really interested to at least test Terragen to see, because of the pictures, we were really impressed with it. And as long as they could handle quite a lot of DEM files, I mean, it seems like something worth a shot.
Yeah, definitely. Well, feel free to contact us with more questions and specific data samples and whatnot. We, as I said, it supports height field format. Most height field formats, we have a lot of support for that. So the national data set viewer that our USGS provides, we support all of their formats by default. I tested that. Might have a chance to show that later. But
and you got multipass output?
What's that? Yes, multipass output. Yes,
and I'll be G-buffer or multipass.
Yes, and I'll be showing that in the next session as well.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
All right, man.
I stored up a question in the chat box from Jake K, and he said he was interested to know how to export terrain to external programs like Maya and light it using HDRI generated from Terragen. So is this something you can answer now, or better placed in the next section?
I think I'll probably just tackle that now. I'm not going to demo it all, but I can show you just real quick walkthrough of the steps you would go through for that. So as I said, there was a lot to show that I didn't get a chance to show. I'll go into the renderer here. So Terragen 3 outputs a variety of image formats, but the best format, if you have an application that can handle EXR, which is ILM, open EXR format, it's a full 32-bit per channel, high dynamic range image format, and that's what you would want to use for doing output for lighting a scene. You would use the spherical camera most likely, and that will give in fact, I can show you an example of that, what the output of that looks like. So here's a spherical camera image, and this is a scene of Mount St. Helens that I've had been working on for quite a while. But anyways, this is a full 360-degree spherical view, and you would map that to your environment map channel, or to your background object, or whatever it is in your 3D software of choice. So output in EXR using a spherical camera at the appropriate dimensions, usually 2:1, I believe, and then map that to your lighting rig. And then to get geometry out, you use the renderer. And so the geometry export that we currently have is camera dependent. It essentially uses the fact that the renderer generates geometry and just redirects the geometry generation output to a file. So we can output to Lightwave LWO, OBJ, or FBX. And FBX should be supported by pretty much any modern 3D application. OBJ is another widely supported format. So the way that works is there's a sequence output tab here. And you go here, there's a micro exporter. You check that box, and you'll see here I'm using the little button with the plus here. I'm going to create a new micro handler. The LWO micro exporter is sort of a legacy thing. LWO is a fairly limited format, and we don't recommend using it, but it's there for those people who still have workflows depending on that. I would suggest using a micro exporter, so I've just selected that. now that I've created a new one using create new here, I'm going to go to the settings of that micro exporter. Okay, here we are. You can select whether or not you want to export normals and texture coordinates. Note that textures, the actual textures, are not exported. Only the terrain geometry with normals and texture coordinates is exported. There's a control for the clipping plane, so just another way to control the area that you're exporting. But as I said, it's camera dependent. So essentially, if I were to export right now with the camera where it is, it would export all of the geometry in frame from foreground to background up to this farthest distance here. And what you'd end up with is sort of a conical or a fan-shaped section terrain. Slowing down my preview here. There we go. What you'd end up with is you see the camera here, and it's got its view kind of spreading out here. You would end up with a area of terrain that was spread out in a triangle from the camera point of view. So if you wanted a square area, all you do is just zoom the camera up, so it's viewing straight down, and you would do it that way. So back in the micro exporter here, you specify a file output. You can specify OBJ, FBX, TGO, or LWO here, and just do this. And now that the micro exporter is enabled, if you click render, it's going to export geometry to the location that you just specified. The other thing I want to mention real quickly is that the density of that geometry is directly controlled by the detail slider here, and it outputs fairly high density geometry by default, so you probably want to start at 0.25 or something like that, and that'll be a good place to start. The amount of geometry Terragen outputs is quite a lot. It's a micropolygon displacement renderer intended to create very high levels of detail, so it's unlikely you'll ever use something above 0.5 for detail on a geometry export. And if you've been creating a scene, you might be using higher detail levels, but you'll probably want to back it off for the geometry export. So, any other questions?
I have a question. In regards to exporting, say if you had additional displacements, like strata displacements or twist and shear or something like that, would that be exported this way as well?
Yes, it would. There is, in fact, another way to export based on height fields, but I generally assume people want the this approach to exporting. It's a little bit more flexible, this approach. The height field based approach has the limitation that you kind of hinted at there, that it's only planar data. There's no overhangs that would be recorded or anything like that. Okay. It essentially transforms any shaders into a height field and then exports that to geometry. So that's another option for exporting geometry, but the micro export is probably the most flexible thing, and it does capture overhangs and essentially any geometry that the render engine would render, it's going to output, and it does not respect backface culling, so you do kinds of objects and whatnot, which is a change from Terragen 2 for anyone who has worked with that. So
awesome, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Jake K made another comment. Actually, he said, how would I use the micro exporter if the camera is animated, like panning, for instance? And then he kind of guessed. He said, oh, maybe I would pull the camera back and then angle it down. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. In that situation, you would want to do a top-down. I would recommend using the orthographic camera mode and just do a top-down render that covers the entire area that your camera will be traversing, and anything that would be visible from that position. And all of the geometry, as I said, has normals and texture coordinates. So if you were to make multiple exports, you should be able to line them up fairly easily, I believe. They're all to the same scale and everything like that. So as long as you have the scale set right in your other application, if you needed to do, for example, one top-down geometry export and one for the background data, you ought to be able to line that stuff up. So,
okay, JK says thank you very much for answering his question.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Now, I think what we'll do is we're on the hour now, so we'll take a break for 5 minutes. We'll stay in the same room, and we'll just start session 2 in 5 minutes' time. So we'll give everyone that break, and we'll start 5 minutes past the hour.
Great.
So thank you again, Ocean, and One person's asked, Drea has asked whether we'll be covering the render options in the next session. I don't think that's listed, but maybe if we've got time, we could talk a little bit about rendering. Would that be okay?
Yes, absolutely. I thought, I guess I don't have that on there. I'll definitely add that on just as I have some examples and whatnot, and I can go over the settings and how that stuff works. I can't probably do a real full demo of it, but I can definitely show it.
Yeah. Okay, so coffee break, everyone. So 5 minutes past the hour.
Great. Thanks for being here, everybody. It's been it's good so far.
Yeah. So stay in the room, everyone. Okay, so these are the topics we'll be covering in session 2, which will start in a few minutes' time. So that should hopefully answer your question. What's in the second session? And just to say, I'm really pleased to have Ocean join us again. We did have at the beginning of the year, we had a sort of mini conference on Vue, and we had about 5 or 6 sessions over a weekend, and that went really well. We covered the nodes and how to use them from scratch, really creating an image from scratch. That's what people wanted to see, and that went really well. So it may well be that early next year, we'll have a similar Terragen conference.
Great.
And I know Ocean's interested in perhaps using Google Hangouts to produce some more of these webinars. So that'd be cool. I'd love to see Google Hangouts in action as well.
Yeah, we're hoping to do kind of more regular Hangouts. I don't know if we have any Mojo World users here, but I know the old Mojo Vox was a popular feature of Mojo World where they really kind of fostered the community. We've had a really fantastic community around Terragen for a long time, but I think it'd be great to extend that even further and be able to have regular direct contact between the community members as well as the staff. And there was obviously a lot that we didn't get to cover today, and questions that we might not get to. So there's plenty of stuff to talk about, and maybe we can kind of look at images and have some advice and suggestions. I think it'd be great to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, take advantage of the forums. Now, I'm guessing that some of you, well, for instance, at least Michelle, haven't used Terragen before very much. So take advantage of PlanetSide. I think it's planetside.co.uk forums, and post any questions you think of beyond these sessions there.
Yeah, our forums are definitely a fantastic resource. Oh, Michelle crashed it apparently. I'd be curious to know how you crashed it. Not a good first.
I made a flyover over a mountain lake,
Yeah.
and I got a 12-core Extreme processor, the latest generation i7, a 64 gig of RAM, and I don't think that's a problem, but it's
No, I
still in
wouldn't think so.
development, right?
Well, certainly everything is still in development. So you just downloaded it during the session today?
Yeah, and I started this anime right away.
Okay. I don't suppose you saved the scene file at all.
No.
Okay.
No,
Did you
because
get it?
I'm really interested in being able to get some early version to try out this multi-dam thing, because we're doing it in Vue right now,
Yeah.
but yeah, Vue has its plus point, but lately I'm starting to see plus points in Terragen too. Because to be quite honest, I've never touched the program. I didn't really like the interface.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say, I'm very familiar with node system and function editors. So yeah, I quickly had a result. So that got me quite motivated. So
Yeah. Well, it's a shame that you got a crash. I wish we had some more info about it. But in general, I mean, perhaps other people can speak to this. We definitely take stability very seriously and try to make a very stable application. I think in general, Terragen has a reputation for being stable, which I think is deserved. But perhaps other actual users can speak to that. Obviously, I'm biased, but if you were to encounter any crashing issues, etc., certainly you could submit it to support, and we'd take a look at it real quick. And
well, I did populate the entire mountain with grass,
okay,
but it wasn't using that much memory, only about 18 gigabytes. So
18.
yeah.
That's a fair amount of memory. not for what your machine has, but in general, that's a fair amount. All right. Well,
Yeah,
Yeah, I was just I wanted to push it right away to its limit, so
sure.
but it looks good.
Good. Well, I'm glad you're here and appreciate your questions and your interest.
Okay, folks. What I'm going to do is stop recording this first session, and we may apply a little bit of editing to it, and we'll start a recording for the second session separately. So it's just easier to break up and send to all of the attendees. So